encourages people from here. It's come to a point now where enough is enough.
We hatched this plan, a running exploratory road trip.
Wow, मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा.
Because water was coming in the house, gunfire was erupting.
Welcome and thank you for joining us today. I'm Samara Fox and I'm the chair of the board of the March on Washington Film Festival. Founded in 2013, the festival serves as a national platform to celebrate and increase awareness of the untold events and icons of the civil rights movement, with the goal of creating leaders of tomorrow. The theme of this year's festival is Environmental Justice for All. This year's films and panels will draw attention to this important issue as it relates to health, education, and well-being in under-resourced communities nationwide. In today's program, current and former members of the Biden, Obama, and Clinton administrations will participate in a comprehensive discussion about African-American leadership in environmental protection and about the federal government's role in addressing environmental justice concerns. We're honored to begin today's program with pre-taped remarks from U.S. EPA Administrator Michael Regan. And then we'll start our panel discussion, moderated by Danielle, Deane-Ryan.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to help kick off this year's March on Washington Film Festival. Nearly 60 years ago, 250,000 people gathered in our nation's capital to fight for justice and equality. Today, their legacy lives on in the courageous activists, students, and community leaders who believe that America, in all her wisdom, still has much room to grow. I'm proud to be a part of an administration that's deeply committed to creating a more equitable future. When President Biden took office, he pledged to prioritize environmental justice and to put the whole of government behind advancing racial equity. This year's festival's theme, Civil Rights and Environmental Justice, strikes at the heart of that mission. At EPA, we believe that all people in this country, no matter the color of their skin, money in their pocket, or community they live in, deserve to realize the full protection of our environmental laws. That's why I directed EPA staff to incorporate environmental justice into every aspect of our work, including our regulatory, permitting, and enforcement activities. We're also working to support the President's Justice 40 initiative, which aims to devote 40% of the benefits from federal investments to underserved communities. We're making progress, but we have a long way to go. Correcting long-standing inequities is our responsibility. It's our obligation, and it will be part of our DNA. Thank you again for inviting me to join you. Together, we will carry out the unfinished work of those who so bravely came before us.
This is Danielle, Deane-Ryan, principal at Jade Advisors, and I am so pleased to be here today with Brandi, Colander, Diane, Dillon-Ridgley, and additional Rosemary and Enobakhare. I was so excited when I saw that this panel was put together because these are three individuals that I would have loved to just have lunch with regularly. And so it's a real pleasure to be here. Brandi Colander is an attorney and sustainability practitioner. She's been Chief Sustainability Officer at Restrock. She's been a principal at the Regan Group. She's been appointed by past presidents as Deputy Secretary for Land and Minerals, among other things. And she is currently board chair of the DC Green Bank Board of Directors. Diane Dillon-Ridgley in the last 40 years has been an amazing environmentalist and human rights activist at the forefront of society shifts from an industrial one-to-one focused more on sustainability. 3 different presidents across 3 administrations have appointed her to US and UN delegations and Earth summits, and she also is on the board of Interface, the world's largest manufacturer of modular tiles and global leader in sustainable design. Rosemary Enobakhare is currently appointed by President Biden to serve as Associate Administrator for the Office of Public Engagement and Environmental Education at the United States EPA. Prior, she was Campaigns Director at the Hub Project, helping to build there and at Clean Water for All, diverse coalitions to help defend bedrock protections. In the Obama administration, she also served as Deputy Assistant Administrator for Public Engagement and Environmental Education. So thank you, ladies, for joining me today for this panel. Diane, I will start with you. You have been witness in the environmental movement to so much and seen the movement shift to pay more attention to justice. With scarce resources, justice advocates have fought to have justice higher on the agenda. We've got the Biden administration now with a Justice 40 initiative. From your perspective, why is this important and how has the needle moved? And what more needs to be done?
Well, thank you, Danielle, and thank you to the organizers of the March on Washington. I've worked with Rosemary and both Brandi. This is you talked about you want to have lunch. This is just a delight to me to be here. And I'm going to take full advantage of being the elder, because the reality is I'm older than everybody. And I've now made peace with that. And actually, to that point, I think your question is really poignant, and the policy wonk in me really wants to answer it. But I actually think this is an even bigger moment. And so I want to say, I'm excited. I happen to also serve on the board of the DC Environmental Film Festival. And I am so excited that the March on Washington Film Festival is making this connection. I was thinking back to a reporter about 15 years ago who said, well, Diane, when did you make the connection between civil and human rights and the environment? And I realized the question itself was the problem, because for me, they've never been separated. You know, I literally remember the March on Washington itself in 1963. I was still in elementary school, so I wasn't old enough to come from Kansas City. But I will tell you, virtually every African-American family and a whole lot of other families of all kinds of backgrounds really paid attention and focused on what was going on in Washington that day. And my godfathers, C.T. Vivian and Dorothy Height, who were all part of the people who organized that March on Washington, have always understood that one's health and one's environment as a backdrop in which you live and thrive is centrally connected to human rights. And all the rest of that work that's gone on, I happen to have gone to Howard University. And as a sophomore, I actually had my internship, my first environmental job at EPA under what is euphemistically referred to these days as Ruckelshaus 1. Now, I give you all that background because to me, these things have never been separated. But this moment, we hope, coming out of this pandemic, or at least learning how to manage it. We are, as a friend of mine, Vernice always calls it the syndemic, with good cause. Or we are also at a moment where we are looking at ending the longest war that we've had in this country. We are finding that a number of people who were just in the way in terms of moving policy and moving focus on issues around climate change have the undisputable reality in front of them. And one of the things that so many of us have said all along is the people who may be last to come on the policy aspect of this, unfortunately, the people who will first deal with it are the ones who don't have very much say-so in terms of making the needle, as you pointed out, Danielle, making the needle move on this. So to me, this is not a moment where we make small or talk about the separation. We need to talk about the connectedness and how all of this absolutely is central. And justice has always been at the center of what it needs to have happen. This past year when John Lewis passed away, he talked about good trouble. Good trouble is always centered around justice. And I have to think of one of my icons. When I was at Howard, we had the pleasure of giving her an honorary doctorate before she passed away way too soon. But Fannie Lou Hamer said it, and said it well. She was sitting there as the Mississippi Democratic Party person. And she said, I am sick and tired of being sick and tired. I think part of our slowness in addressing things domestically and internationally with grassroots people all over the world who are environmental champions and fighters and who face literally people like Roberta Harris, who have been killed by regimes, that has happened because the status quo has allowed financial reward and remuneration to come to too small a stream of folks. And justice demands that we now look at an environmental justice as a policy, and people of color domestically and around the world have been in the forefront of pushing and demanding environmental justice, and good allies who have been part of this process. And I know this is only supposed to be a 2-minute answer, but I just want to make the point that we are now at a point where what we have been saying, some of us as lone individuals in the wind, people at whom people pointed and snickered, now understand all of this is connected. Whether it's been Wangari Maathai, who was a friend of ours, or Vandana Shiva, who's still kicking and taking notes, or Arundhati Roy, or so many other, and I am naming women, that's right, so many other fabulous women who have been on the forefront and lines of change around the world, or one of my mentors, Bella Abzug, who when she was in the House understood all of this and brought us together. That's why this moment, right now, this 21st century, is the completion of the promise of democracy. It is the justice century, and that is what we're doing. And that's how I'd like to try and answer your question. And more of it needs to happen. More people need to be engaged, and we need to do it sooner because we're going to do it. And the earth is going to be here. The question is, how many people will be harmed unnecessarily? How much? And how unfortunate it is for us to be slow in getting to what we are going to do is an inevitability. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Diane. And everyone can see why Diane is such an inspiration to so many, in particular to me. Rosemary, I'll turn to you. We first crossed paths when we were both working under the Obama administration. I was at the Department of Energy. You were at the Environmental Protection Agency, and you're back. And in between that, we are in the shadow and emerging out of the last administration's different approach to justice and the environment. You work on public engagement. At this particular point in history, what's exciting and challenging about your goals given the mandate from the current president?
Absolutely. Thank you. And I just want to say how excited I am to be on the stage with the three of you. To have a panel of such dynamic women is just amazing. And I'm just happy to be able to share the stage with you all. And for me, you know, I was in here under the Obama administration, and we did some really awesome work at the time. People were excited about the work. There was a learning curve, though. People were still learning about what climate change actually is and how it actually affects various communities. But I would say now it's different. One, we have a president who has prioritized in a very real way the environment. Talking about climate change, talking about environmental justice, talking about equity, right? And so it's just the momentum that's out there, the excitement that's out there now has made this job completely different. It's not me getting on the phone begging people to do things. It's like me getting on the phone. People are excited to participate and engage. And to have an EPA administrator, Michael Regan, who is an HBCU graduate, is also just very exciting for so many people. I'm also an HBCU graduate. I went to Spelman. And so being able to have someone like him in that role, it's just inspiring. I've had students reach out to me to tell me, look, I haven't learned much about the environment before, but like I'm interested now, right? Like that matters. And so the momentum that's out there is really important. And I would say, you know, as we look back and think about the folks who voted in November, folks overwhelmingly talked about climate change and climate action. And I think during the course of the last year, people really saw the importance of addressing some of these issues and how there are superstorms, like, you know, the various hurricanes and others that are hitting various communities in some really real ways. Infrastructure is something that people are talking about as well, and something that people want to address also. And I would say another big thing is young people came out overwhelmingly to talk about the need to act on climate. And so we're in a very different moment. People are excited. People want to engage. People really want bold action. And people want to make sure that we're providing justice for all. Environmental justice has never had a seat at the table like this. And so we're really taking advantage of this moment and to really make sure that we get the protections to the communities that need them the most.
Thank you, Rosemary. It brings great comfort that you are there at the EPA, and we will be getting back to you. Let me turn to Brandi. Brandi, so great to see you. You've worked in the private sector. You've worked in the public sector. You're now board chair of the DC Green Belt. Even when the private sector is trying to do the right thing, share with us how critical it is for us to make sure that government policy plays a role. Let us know. And add a little color for us. And besides stopping the bad things that we hear about, how is the DC Green Belt trying to create the good?
Yeah, thank you, Danielle. And I just, again, want to thank the Film Festival for putting a spotlight on this as a key issue. I think it's so critical as people are starting to sort of draw connections to what they're experiencing day to day in this pandemic and really understanding how do we prepare ourselves for the future and who's been deeply thinking about it so that hopefully folks can sleep a little bit better at night knowing that there are folks that have been putting in the work for years to come. And I just have to lift up Diane because, you know, you mentioned Wangari and others, and it is deep work that allows people and sort of calls people to this space. And it's Diane, you know, literally pulling me, sort of digging out of the crates, and just, I was working with the Natural Resources Defense Council and bringing me with her to meet Wangari. I'm so grateful for that opportunity, because to have touched and to know the legacies of the people and to understand the resistance that they faced, it is just remarkable. And so the deep work that I think all of us are committed to, and we only represent a small portion of others, is huge. But Danielle, before I get to the bank, I think the other thing that I was so excited about being able to contribute to today is the fact that you have had Black women for decades involved in multiple presidencies, helping to chart the path, not necessarily in the spotlight, but really focusing on pulling together the important voices that are often not heard in rooms and spaces that are often not entered. And so I was tremendously grateful during the Obama administration to be able to work with the White House Council on Environmental Quality as their Deputy General Counsel, reactivate the Environmental Justice Working Group, which really touched across all of the federal agencies, and give them voice, give them convening power in the White House to work with the Department of the Interior and focus on communities that are dealing with a coal transition, the rural Americas that are often forgotten, trying to figure out how to pour $1 billion of investment there so that we can all prepare and brace ourselves for a clean energy transition. And then also being able to advance the first offshore wind farms. And so I think these are stories that people need to know because the groundwork has been laid. One of the things that the Obama administration was really intentional about carrying forward, in addition to using climate change for the first time, was permitting and infrastructure. We all know about healthcare, but permitting and infrastructure, the big billion, trillion dollar projects, our roads, our bridges, where we fail year after year to meet the mark. It is so clear now, as we have these uncharacteristic storms that are happening at a much faster clip, that we are unprepared. And as a Jersey girl, you know, it's heartbreaking to realize how many people died in their basements because the people preparation portion of knowing how to pivot in a climate changing environment is simply that muscle's just not there. So one of the things that the Green Bank is really excited about doing and is intentional about doing is working to leverage private-public partnerships. It's effectively, think of us as a bank that's doing the work that perhaps more traditional banks still perceive as being a little too risky. But in municipalities across the country, because there are about 16 and growing green banks, and we actually now have some traction around a national green bank movement, you have municipalities pouring resources into these institutions to help them say, what is unique about your location? And what can we do in terms of supporting more solar development for affordable homes, more stormwater treatment processes, more, you know, depending on where you are regionally, is it wind, on or offshore? What are the things that are unique to our region that we can leverage, bring jobs and economic development, and actually help people tangibly understand how they too can benefit from a clean economy that really has transitioned our energy platform and done so in a way that Mayor Muriel Bowser is really committed to, and we are as well, which incorporates inclusive prosperity. So Danielle, we cannot do this without shared resources. We obviously need to become more aligned in how we get there, but we also can't wait.
For a campaign they launched earlier this year called the Climate Funders Justice Pledge. And the reason they did that is because as we think about resources and we think about all the engagement that you need to address climate, the philanthropy sector plays a key role. This Climate Funders Justice Pledge was launched in reaction to a shocking statistic. When you look at the largest climate funders, only 1.3% of dollars from those large climate funders go to organizations led by people of color whom, as Diane pointed out, are the ones closest to the problem and need to help shape the solutions. People often underestimate, as they think about societal actors, the role of philanthropy in helping or hindering, building power, and movements. If each of you might in turn share, why is this solving this challenge with philanthropy and scaling up support to people of color-led environmental justice organizations critical? And Diane, I'll start with you, and then just to mix it up again, I'll go to Rosemary and then Brandi.
Well, thank you. Well, one, I used to serve on the Wallace Global Fund board, and Bob Wallace asked me, I think it was 97, to join that board as he was putting it together with a specific commitment to being flexible and being supportive of grassroots initiatives. You have people like the Goldman Foundation, Richard and Rhoda Goldman, who put the Goldman Awards in place, and it's not the typical aspect of philanthropy, but has made a huge point, because they said if we've got the Nobel Peace Prize, they made a commitment. And Richard came to me shortly after Rhoda passed and after Bella Abzug had passed, and he sat down and I saw the conviction and the understanding that grassroots people who live on all of the inhabited continents, and for years they have been a beacon and an early voice of supporting people who have been working at the grassroots level, as Brandi underscored, the people who haven't been, having the headlines. But the point of why it is essential, because philanthropy is actually a luxury, and we've built, especially in this country, an infrastructure that supports its tax base, and so therefore there's the commitment to make that philanthropy work for people. And someone who's been really stellar at that has been Darren Walker, since he's been head at the Ford Foundation. And I remember we had a conversation, our first conversation centered around Yolanda Cocobatzi, who was a dear friend for years, who had been the administrator of the environment for Ecuador and had been on the Ford Foundation board. But he asked her to step aside so he could put a person of color from the grassroots level in Colombia on the Ford Foundation board. There is, and this is, again, underscoring this commitment of this being the justice century. It's interesting. It was Reverend Theo Parker, who was a mid-19th century Massachusetts Unitarian minister. And he was the one who actually said, the arc of justice, I can see but little ways, but it tells me that it bends towards justice. And if we had a little more time, I could start with the Magna Carta and bring us all the way forward to 1948, where we first had at the UN level the Declaration of Human Rights. And now here we are with this year's session at the UN, with considering having a fundamental right to a healthy environment be a commitment globally, that gets passed and the United States supports it. But your point is, and I think I also serve as the incoming chair again of CL, the Center for International Labor Law. There is a knitting and a support on both the giving side and the receiving side of NGOs, of organizations, of philanthropic support, of corporate support, of being a good neighbor in their local neighborhoods. There's an understanding that we are at such a critical moment. If we don't do this now, I mean, I did a speech for the tricentennial using a dateline of 2076, and I want us to be able to have the people who do that speech and who are there at that moment of July 4th in 2076, when this country is 300 years, to be able to say that when we were on duty in the early part of this 21st century, we made sure that we realigned things so that justice was central. Justice 40, women's work, and I'm not just talking about women, because obviously there are good women and many good non-women, is the way I prefer to say it, who have been doing and lifting on this work all along. But this is the moment that all of us have to come alive. Now you've got Tamara Tolles O'Loughlin, who's going to be who is the new head of the environmental grant makers. It's not just leveling the playing field. First of all, it's not play. It's not just leveling the field, but is absolutely integrating and understanding and respecting that everyone has a right in this process to be part of this process. And we cannot make this some sort of esoteric, do-gooding. This is fundamental to the right of humanity and everyone's capacity to be able to live and thrive. Philanthropy has to line up, the academy has to line up, government has to line up, and the private sector has to line up. And I sense, and I think we are demanding, and we are a loud voice, we are a choir, and we are in harmony, that this is the moment and we must go forward. We can no longer tolerate this business as usual. It is too cruel to too many. I see Brandi's little daughter. We must make sure that her well, I haven't met your children, Danielle, but we must make sure that we have done all we can for my Kareem and Saul, even though they're grown people older than half of you anyway. But the point is, it's now. It's too serious. It's just too serious for us to dally or to be slow. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. And I think we have to correct that so that my kids meet their Auntie Diane that they don't even know they have yet, but that they've heard me talk about. So, well, let me turn to Rosemary and then Brandi as you think about the March on Washington Festival, honoring this campaign. By the way, the campaign asked for all the top funders to do two things: be transparent, one, and say in the last 2 years, what dollars went to BIPOC-led organizations that focus on justice, and two, it says this 1.3% number can't work. Whatever your number is, get to 30%. What would you add to fill out what Diane had said about how critical this is if we're hoping to achieve justice for you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I have seen the power of our voices. And so making sure that we're able to tell our own stories is really important. I think the philanthropic community will allow us to be able to tell those stories in a very real and dynamic way. And it can't just be the federal government. We need to pair resources together with federal government, private sector, the philanthropic community, in order to be able to provide actual relief to communities on the ground. As I've traveled the country in this job, currently with the Administrator Regan, but also previously under the Obama administration, seeing the things that folks are seeing on the ground. DC is a bit of a bubble, right? Like you sit behind your desk and you make public policy, but you have to leave DC in order to really understand what's happening on the ground and how you do need to pair those funds together in order to be able to make real and substantive change. And so, again, I think our voices have power. And making sure that we're telling our stories is really critical and important for holding me accountable, us accountable in this administration, but also Congress accountable as well.
Brandi?
Yeah, thank you, Danielle. And I feel like you have a lot of expertise in this space. We've had discussions over the years around philanthropy, growth opportunities, and some challenges. Rosemary and I have worked in similar spaces for the same organization, and also trying to sort of navigate nuances of making sure measures are not performative, frankly. And I think in this moment, especially post George Floyd, and where there's sort of been even more of an awakening around the impact that social implications have on bottom lines for corporations, it is so important to focus on other metrics around ESG, around retention of talent. People don't always, the metrics that you outlined, Danielle, are really important, but I think it's also important to see who has sticking power, because philanthropists are using that as a metric to make sure that their investments 5, 10, 20 years down the road have actually really changed systemically. They've moved the needle forward in a way. I think the same has to be true across the board in the campaign, to make sure that as people are given opportunities that traditionally have not had those opportunities, they are positioned well to stay. And when they don't, I think that needs to be questioned, deeply questioned, held to account. And it needs to go beyond government, quite frankly. Michael and I used to have conversations when we were both with large environmental organizations, trying to navigate and chart our careers and looking at sort of the landscape and thinking, well, what could this look like in a few years versus where can I have an impact? And as you can tell, he has made extraordinary strides. And all the women gathered here today have been in exceptional leadership opportunities because of the government. There has to be a reason why that does not line up in other sectors. And as Diane and others mentioned, it requires the work of all sectors working together to elevate this cause. I think the other thing, and Diane, I would love for you to do a Magna Carta podcast and on the trajectory. I think the world needs that. But I think the other thing is, it is absolutely critical that we move beyond performative action. So in addition to the accountability, it's not enough to click and retweet. We have to start to get really tactical and strategic about where we spend our dollars and what those boardrooms look like and who actually has leverage and influence on moving the needle. The time is absolutely now. I think that people see and feel the ground moving under them, whether it's from, the sustainability or environmental lens, or from the social lens, or the government accountability lens. And I think that forums and venues like this, and I do just want to take a moment to thank Robert Regan and Samara and the other leadership with the film festival to say you are holding a very unique space that is so critical to the discourse, and I hope that it continues to sustain. I look forward to the festival every year. I'm always learning something, and you're on the cutting edge. And so I just want to thank you for this venue to continue to give voice to these issues.
Thank you. Well, I'll close out with the last question. And since I think it would be fitting for Diane, given that she said she owns the elder space, I'll let you close us out. So I will start in this case with Rosemary and then Brandi. We have a lot of people looking at this today across the country that are seeing some of these advances, looking to go further, looking to make a difference. And I want to end with asking for advice for those looking to make a career, stick with a career in the environmental field at this moment, in the wake of all the things that we're seeing and keeping in our hearts the impact from Ida, from the south to the northeast and in between. So what would you say, or what's some of the best advice that you've received that you would want to share? So I'll start with you, Rosemary, and then I'll go to Brandi and Diane to close out.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. For me, I am excited about building the bench of young people coming into the environmental space, particularly people from communities of color. I actually worked on the Biden transition. And, one of the things that I really that was at the front of my mind is how do we make sure that for the future generation, the next generation, that folks look like me in these seats. And so, I would say never be afraid to reach out. I'm happy to talk to anyone. When I first took a job at the National Wildlife Federation, I reached out to Brandi, right? I talked to Diane. Danielle, you were a mentor for me. Like having conversations, real conversations with people and building mentors is really important and critical. And reaching out to folks. I've shockingly reached out to people on LinkedIn as I was new in the environmental space and really learned more about how to chart my path towards, a longer term career within the environmental space. But having more Black women in this space is really important and something that I'm extremely passionate about. And folks should feel free to reach out to me if I can be, helpful at all, because that's really important and something that I have often advocated for. It's lonely sometimes in these rooms when you're the only Black woman in the room. And I want to change that. I want to make sure that is not a norm. And that as we look forward, that we have younger people coming behind us who are women in these rooms owning these spaces.
Thank you, Rosemary. Brandi?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I completely agree with everything that Rosemary said. The pipeline is just critical. I recall a time where Diane literally gave me her hotel room key and said, if you need this to stay, and it was important because let's be honest, in this world, I was broke. So I want to tell people there is generosity that comes from folks who really committed to this space and are willing to grow and invest in you. And I want to also say you can earn a living in this space, but when you're doing it from a heart-led place for nonprofits, you feel like, oh my gosh, I want to be there for the cause, but I literally can't afford to stay somewhere. That can be changed when you build deep and learn from others who have come before you. And so I'm very grateful for those relationships and happy to pour into and continue to pour into others. I would also say, don't accept the paradigm, break it. Now is a time where the infrastructure clearly does not work in any interpretation of the word. It's time for new platforms. It's time to challenge the status quo. There is a lot of opportunity to do things differently, and you need to elevate your voice in a way where you can pierce through and don't fall back on old paradigms. They don't work. They're broken. And so when you don't see enough of you somewhere, it's broken. And I think this group of women understands that intimately. And to that, and the last thing I'll say is the pioneer tax is costly. And at the same time, it is absolutely worth it. And so you may be the first and forgotten, but you are absolutely charting a course for others. And I think that that has personally given me tremendous joy, despite how ironic it sounds, but to know that it will be a little bit easy for someone else, to know that I can pour into someone and set them up to be better, to share my mistakes so that they are better positioned, is just helpful for us from a humanitarian perspective. And so I'm encouraged that we are going to grow tired of what is not working, and that younger generations have less of a palate for what is clearly a commitment around climate change that we have to be more directed towards.
Thank you, Brandi. And Diane, we'll close out with you.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank Samar. I really want to thank you, Danielle, for putting together a wonderful panel with very thoughtful questions. Everybody knows I love Brandi and I love Rosemary. Thanks to, and well, always. And thank you to the two of them. I think it's just ditto, ditto, ditto in terms of saying there is work everywhere. People may or may not realize I actually live in Iowa for the last 38 or 39 years. There's work everywhere at every single level. And as my mother always used to say, if you don't worry about who gets the credit, then you can do a tremendous amount to make progress. I want to close with a connection back to the March on Washington event itself in the context of the film festival, because all too often people forget that 5 or 6 weeks after the March on Washington was the Birmingham bombing, and 4 girls were killed that Sunday morning, and all they had done was go to Sunday school. And one of those young women was Carol Robertson. A number of people know what I'm talking about. She belonged to an organization called Jack and Jill growing up. It's a primarily African-American organization. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it. People who know it, know it. After her after her martyrdom, because so many people have been made I don't want to say unwilling, but have been made veterans in this long arc of getting to a just world. I made a connection to her parents. I received the Carol Robertson Award for Jack and Jill. And one of the things you had to do was to make and think about how you were going to spend your life being committed to civil rights and human rights. Now, in 1968, when I wrote that little essay, we didn't use the same language that we now use about environmental justice. It's taken us a while to get this language better. I'll finish by saying language also matters. How we talk about things and the ways in which we frame things, because then you change the mindset of people when you include them in, as opposed to language that has for far too long been designed to exclude us out. We have at every single level opportunity. It is nothing but opportunity to change. And we must be, we can pull on the Gandhi saying. There's just so many sayings. One of my favorites is with Bella Abzug, who used to always say, "I believe that women will change the nature of power before power changes the nature of women." And maybe I'll finish with that. And Maya Angelou always talked about courage. We need at this moment that courage. We need in this moment that same kind of focused generousness of heart. We can talk about nurturing. We can all be mothers, aunties, relatives, and supporters. There's always someone who needs to learn, who is eager to learn, and take, as each of you have said, take a moment, say something encouraging to them and support them and let them know that they can also, when I stand on the stage and people say, "Oh, I can never do that. I can never do that." I said, well, if you see me at a microphone, I'm not alone. There are hundreds of people, all kinds of people, who encouraged me and supported me along the way. People at EPA, Suzanne Smoot was the secretary. She told me as much as anybody else did in all that office. Everyone has an opportunity to contribute. Everyone has knowledge. Everyone has standing, and everyone has a right to that voice. That's where we are. We're at that moment of true equality. I'm going to close. Let's make this the justice century so that when we have that tricentennial moment in 2076, we can show that we did what we needed to do to make this world a better world for everyone. Thank you so much, everyone who contributed to this conference, to this session today. It just was an honor to be here with every one of you.
Thank you, Diane. And you can see why I said this is a group of women that I would love to just have lunch with on any given day, and you've all invited me to help me to succeed. It takes a village. And back to the theme of this March on Washington Film Festival, Civil Rights and Environmental Justice, a Single Garment of Destiny. Thank you to the film festival, in particular to Sarah Bay, Samara Fox, Robert Regan, and of course to Brandi, Diane, and Rosemary. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Samara, Danielle, Diane, Rosemary, Brandi. This was not only an interesting panel, but really an invigorating one. And while we all know that climate change is real and that climate change is urgent, and we all know that climate change disproportionately affects communities of color, as Diane so wonderfully said, we all have the power to make a difference. One workshop that we're doing at the festival this year is how to be a citizen journalist. It's a virtual workshop, and we can all tell about the stories in our immediate environments to a greater public, and that's one way we can make a difference. We do hope you'll join us for other workshops, for films, for our panels, and yes, for live events this year. I think you know where to find us. We're at marchonwashingtonfilmfestival.org, and we hope to see you again soon for other programs this year. Till then, thanks for joining us, and most of all, be well. Goodbye.
Well, Lord, somebody's calling my name. Well,